Unless there's other questions, we'll move to the next item, item 3, comprehensive plan update, population and employment element. And we have Mr. Steve Toy here. Steve, hi.
Hi. Let me share my screen. Let's see here. Okay. All right, you should see my screen. Yeah, thank you. I'm Steve Toy, with Principal Demographer with Snohomish County Planning and Development Services. Thank you, Chair Larson. And I'll be briefing you tonight on the changes that are proposed to the population and employment element of the county's comprehensive plan. So in response to the previous question regarding the amendments that are proposed in this particular element, they are in strikeout and underline mode that are specific to changes to the current population employment element, unlike the repeal and replace to the introduction. So with the agenda, you will have seen the staff report dated March 10th, 2023 for the population and employment changes, as well as an attachment A to the staff report with the changes proposed to the narrative of the population employment element, as well as an attachment B with the specific underscore and strikeout policy summary table changes. So let's dive into the purpose of the briefing, just to give you an overall context of what the population employment element of the county's comprehensive plan is all about. What are the specific changes that we're proposing, why we're proposing them, and then to also give you a sense of the context for the population and employment element policies, where Snohomish County unincorporated area growth allocations fit in within the other jurisdictions in Snohomish County, as well as the other 3 counties in the Puget Sound region, and as well as the statewide context. So that gets into the whole Growth Management Act, Vision 2050, the regional plan, and the countywide planning policy context for the development of the growth targets following the proposed policies in the population and employment element. Also, there's an opportunity here for commissioners to ask questions and for me to try and provide feedback. So the overall context of why we have a population employment element is a major effort, like David Killingstad originally described. There's the periodic review, and then there's a compliance review. For the periodic review, every 10 years, the county, working with the cities, is required under the Growth Management Act to ensure that we have the areas and densities sufficient to accommodate the next 20 years of population and employment growth. So every 10 years, under the Growth Management Act, we work with the cities to update the urban growth areas so that it can accommodate the next 20 years of growth. So we establish a 20-year plan horizon, and 10 years proceed. At that 10-year mark, we update the plan for another 20 years. So we never get more than 10 years beyond the 20-year GMA plan horizon. So this element contains the policies that guide that process of projecting growth to the year 2044 in this case, with the comp plan update occurring next year in 2024. It'll cover growth to the year 2044. And the policies cover how we work with the cities and the unincorporated areas to develop those growth allocations using the Snohomish County Tomorrow process. So the end result of all that is an urban growth projection that's used for sizing the county's urban growth area in the comp plan update next year. The policies also include a process for adjusting growth allocations if need be over time, based on monitoring of actual growth conditions that occur in relation to the growth projections. So the policy changes really fall into 3 major buckets. The first is a housekeeping type of set of changes, where reference to documents like the Vision 2050 regional plan are updated. The regional plan, Vision 2050, was adopted by member jurisdictions of the Puget Sound Regional Council in October 2020. It replaces the previous regional plan called Vision 2040 that had been adopted about 10 years prior to that, and which guided our last county comp plan update. That first bullet really just describes kind of the housekeeping edits that are proposed. The second bullet gets into a little more substantive, where The Vision 2050 regional plan calls for a growth allocation result in the county for allocating growth in or near urban centers and near high capacity transit facilities, and to support in a way that supports the jobs housing balance over time and infill development within the urban growth boundary. So there's a clear urban emphasis in Vision 2050, and then on top of that, in Vision 2050, a more specific, focused effort at allocating and signing growth near centers and high capacity transit facilities. Conversely, on the areas outside of the urban boundary, the rural areas, there's an emphasis to de-emphasize and reduce population growth in those areas, specifically to just 4.5% of the county's growth through the year 2044. And that's down from the current 8.5% rural share in the county's comp plan, which goes out to the year, currently goes out just to the year 2035. So why these changes are proposed? They're intended to, again, address the direction that we get from PSRC's Vision 2050 regional plan. And like I mentioned, establishing areas of the county where growth is encouraged according to the regional plan, as well as discouraged under the regional plan over the next 20 years. So those are the policy changes. Actually, if you go through the tables and look at the summary table and look at the specific substantive policy changes, there's not a lot. The structure of the population employment element policy is already, it already addresses a lot of the direction that is needed for this comp plan update. So it's only some specific isolated changes, but I'm going to spend the rest of this briefing to try and zero in on the context, even though right now the specific initial growth target information that I'll be covering here and where it comes from isn't part of the amendments that you're seeing yet. But this does, as far as background, though, explain to you what the context is that the unincorporated plan update is working within. And it's a much larger context, the surrounding cities, the other 3 counties in the Puget Sound region, as well as the state requirements. But most of our direction that we're focusing in on for the growth allocations coming from PSRC's Vision 2050 regional plan that contains multi-county planning policies, actions, and importantly, a regional growth strategy which guides how much and where within the 4-county central Puget Sound region growth is assigned to the year 2050. And that includes the 4 counties of Snohomish, King, Pierce, and Kitsap. The regional plan, Vision 2050, is horizontally consistent with the other major regional planning documents that PSRC produces, the Regional Transportation Plan and the Regional Economic Strategy. And it's also sets the stage for vertical consistency with the plan updates that are occurring at the countywide planning policy level, as well as the local comprehensive plan updates done by cities and counties. So everybody is required to be within the 4-county region consistent with what the regional plan says, and then the regional plan document is consistent with the transportation and regional economic strategy. That's the goal. I'm going to spend some time on this slide because this is really the framework for what we're working with them for the 2024 comp plan update. This slide shows the geographic pattern that we've been given in the regional growth strategy from Vision 2050, as well as the growth allocation assignments for population and employment within that regional pattern. So this is really what controls kind of the parameters for the amount of growth that not just the unincorporated urban areas and the rural areas is planning for in next year's comp plan update, but all the other cities. So you can see how we fit in within that effort, again, directed by the PSRC regional plan. So the key thing here is that the regional growth strategy includes a set of regional geographies, as they're called. And what a regional geography is a collection of jurisdictions that have certain characteristics, either existing or planned characteristics, that cause them to be lumped together in the regional plan for growth assignment purposes. There's 6 different regional geographies in the regional plan, and this map that I clipped from Vision 2050 just focuses in on the Snohomish County portion. I apologize for the how it's clipped. Unfortunately, the PSRC map does not extend to the northern extent of the county. We're in the middle of fixing that for the map that will show in the population and employment element. So it shows the entire county, including Stanwood and Darrington, important players in all of this. But for now, this is just suffices just to show you the main ingredients of how the regional geographies work for the growth allocation purposes. So excuse the omission at the very northern end of the county for the time being. 6 different regional geographies. They're on this map for Snohomish County. They are the metropolitan city, core cities, high capacity transit communities, remaining cities and towns, remaining urban unincorporated, that should say unincorporated, not just urban, and then unincorporated rural. So the way that looks on this map, let's start with the metropolitan city, is the city of Everett. So it's shown in this orange color. It is the central city for Snohomish County that's established in the regional plan. King County has 2 central cities established in the regional plan, city of Seattle as well as Bellevue. Pierce has Tacoma, Kitsap has Bremerton. With the metropolitan city status assigned to the city of Everett, there's a big role for them to play in terms of growth accommodation. There you can see, I want to point out how that city geography lines up with this overlay of the high capacity transit routes that are shown on this map, which figures very prominently, importantly in the regional growth strategy in Vision 2050. And you can see the light rail route is identified by these larger high capacity transit station areas. They are basically depicting half-mile radius around the light rail stations, starting in, if you can see my pointer here, I'm pointing at the Mount Lake Terrace stop, the Linwood stop. There's another one planned for Linwood, second one eventually, and as part of Sound Transit 3. Then there's the 164th Street stop at I-5 in the unincorporated county, another one at 128th and I-5, another provisional station at Airport Road and 99, another one at Payne Field, Southwest Everett, another one along 99 at the Boeing Freeway, and then another one in downtown Everett, somewhere between the station and Everett Station and downtown. So this is the light rail system as it comes up from Mount Lake Terrace up I-5, then over to Payne Field and then up to Everett. So that plays a really important role in the growth assignment, but also included in these large station areas is the ferry terminals at Mukilteo and Edmonds. Those are half-mile radius circles for the HCT station areas. It also includes the commuter rail stops at those 2 locations. So those locations factor into the growth allocation process in Vision 2050 as well. And then everything else that you see with these smaller dots are the BRT stations, the bus rapid transit stations that feed into the light rail system, going both from eventually the planned service up to Smoky Point all the way down to King County along 99. Then there's also the east-west service that feeds into, eventually will feed into the light rail stations, like 128th and 130th. There's the 164th, 196th going down to Edmonds, some of these, as well as the BRT on Swift service, Blue Line, I think the Green Line, there's eventually the Orange Line. So all these things are being connected by CT eventually as planned service over time to make this whole integration of high capacity transit network work in conjunction with the growth allocations. So that's really important to see how that's integrated in this regional geography map. The other thing, 2 more things I'll point out here are the regional growth centers, the large darkish spot here figures really prominently in the regional growth strategy. It's a major regional center that's called for growth accommodation in downtown Everett. There's also Linwood's city center that's recognized in the regional plan as a regional center. And there's the city of Bothel's Canyon Park regional growth center that's recognized in the regional plan. So Snohomish County has 3 regional centers along the spine of high capacity transit. And then there's 2 manufacturing industrial centers. That's a little bit lighter gray circles, one at Southwest Everett Payne Field, and then the other is the new Cascade Industrial Center, manufacturing center at Arlington and Marysville that you see on the north end. So those are the pieces that fit together to help understand why this assignment of population jobs by regional geography is the way it is. So Metro City, we talked about how that looks. Then the core cities, the next tier down is the city of Linwood and the city of Bothell. And so a little bit sort of in a less orange color. And the reason they're distinct from the other regional geographies is they have regional growth centers in their jurisdictions that are recognized in the regional plan. So they play a really important role as well as Everett in terms of growth accommodation going forward. And then there's a new category, just dropping down one more, regional geography within Vision 2050 that wasn't in Vision 2040. And that's called high capacity transit communities. And it can include both cities and unincorporated urban areas as well this time. So we have 6 cities in the high capacity transit communities starting on the far north, Arlington through Marysville, Mill Creek, Malik Terrace, Edmonds, and Mukilteo. So these are cities that are outside of metro and core, but have high capacity transit that get brought into this category, and a lot of growth as a result is assigned to them. Notice also that most of the unincorporated Southwest UGA is now included in that same category, with the few exceptions that are not part of the HCT communities. Most of the unincorporated Southwest is. So that's a real contrast to Vision 2040, where now because of the planned high capacity transit service and recognition of the role that the unincorporated UGA can play in terms of growth accommodation, Vision 2050 assigns a significant amount of growth to the county in those areas, unlike Vision 2040, which downplayed those areas for growth accommodation and was focused almost solely on cities as the locations. Vision 2050 is substantially different in recognizing the role that the unincorporated UGA in a place like unincorporated Southwest County can play now that ST3 has 3 light rail stations that, 2 of them that are planned, one is provisional, that is going in between Linwood and Everett. So it's a big role for the county planning process to play. And as you can see, if you look at this first 3 categories, the vast majority of the population and employment growth in the county goes to those 3 sets of jurisdictions. 84% of the population growth and 87% of the job growth are going to those 3 categories. You can see the remaining cities and towns, that would be Stanwood, Darrington, Granite Falls, Lake Stevens, Snohomish, Monroe, Sultan, Gold Bar Index, and also Briar and Woodway within the Southwest UGA play a much smaller role in the Vision 2050 regional growth strategy for accommodating population and employment growth. Similarly, the remaining pieces of the unincorporated urban area that are associated with some of the satellite cities are really downplayed in terms of the growth that Vision 2050 assigns to them. And so you can see that some of those in the gray color areas, as well as some of the pockets within the unincorporated Southwest. And then the rural area, of course, is significantly downplayed for population and employment growth. This is dealing with the time frame from 2020 to 2044. So instead of 4.5%, it's actually now lower because the census 2020 results show that we're growing. From 2017, which was the base year for the Vision 2050, to 2020, the rural area has grown higher than than the forecast would call for. So now we've eaten into that 4.5%, or looking at 3.3% for the share of the county's growth going outside the UGA for population over the next 20 years. So that really, I wanted to spend some time to see, understand the structure of this and how especially the unincorporated Southwest fits in with this, within this strategy, as well as how the rural area fits in an opposite, in a converse sort of way into the regional growth strategy. We had to figure out then with the cities, we're given these large regional categories, how to allocate growth to individual jurisdictions. So the process that we worked through with the cities was in 2021 at SCT. The starting point data was the buildable lands report from 2021. And even though it only covers capacity estimates to the year 2035, consistent with the current comp plan horizon, it provides a really good starting point for looking at what it will take to get to 2044, another 9 years beyond the buildable lands report capacity. So this buildable lands report data is used extensively to help establish that that first cut, and then working with the cities where the buildable lands capacity isn't entirely adequate to get us to 2044. There was a technical process for assigning that additional growth beyond the 2035 timeframe to individual cities. And that resulted in a recommendation from Snohomish County tomorrow at the end of 2021 to the County Council. The County Council did adopt into the countywide policies in February 2022 the initial population and employment growth targets that were the result of that assignment of growth out to 2044, consistent with the regional growth strategy. And you can see, if you want to go to that website, Appendix A of the countywide policies includes the maps that show the different geographies that are associated with the population targets and the employment targets that are in Appendix B. So you can line up, you know, the growth that is allocated to Bothell, the city of Bothell, for example, as 2020 to 2044, an increase of 13,150, as opposed to the unincorporated Muga around it in this slightly orange area, the growth of almost 11,000. So you can go through each of the areas and see what that looks like. So that's in the countywide policies. What this countywide policies say in terms of what those targets mean is that they indicate how much growth each jurisdiction is expected to plan for in its comp plan update. So that's a statement in each jurisdiction's plan that they can grow to that amount. There's, however, 2 steps in getting there before they're finalized. And we're right now in the first step, which is the initial growth targets that were developed and adopted in 2021, adopted by the council in 2022. There, according to our CPPs, they're to be used for at least one of the plan alternatives evaluated by jurisdictions for their plan updates. Jurisdictions can plan or evaluate other plan alternatives that gets them in a different spot by 2044, but at least one of their plan alternatives needs to address the adopted initial targets. So the county staff will be bringing to you later this year in the fall information on 3 different land use alternatives with a growth allocation assignment that's different for each one. But one of them will include growth assignments that's consistent with the adopted initial targets. Once it goes through the process, however, the county council ultimately chooses a preferred plan alternative associated, the growth targets associated with that preferred plan alternatives will be placed into the population and employment element for adoption in next year's comp plan update. We're not showing it right now because we don't know, we can't anticipate what the preferred plan alternative will be next year and the growth targets associated with that. So we do have a placeholder in population employment element for those eventually to go into. But just recognize that you're not seeing the specific numbers yet in the population employment element until we get to the end result next year when council chooses a preferred alternative. And then we could wind up different than what the initial target showed. Each city could wind up different if they're evaluating other alternatives. So there's a reconciliation process in 2025 to reconcile any differences and make adjustments to comp plans as needed. This will be the 4th time we've done a SCT reconciliation process. We did it the first time around in 96, again in 2006 and again in 2016. Now we'll be doing it in 2025. So it has worked previously to follow up with the comp plan updates to make those reconciled targets adjustments, and those are when the final allocations then become set. The remaining portion of the slides really just dive into what the initial targets look like, so you get an idea of the challenge that's ahead of us as we go into a plan update in a serious way now over the next year and a half. Not just the challenges for us, but other jurisdictions in Snohomish County. It's based on the initial growth targets developed consistent with the regional plan. So just to set the stage at the countywide level, we are planning for 1.136 billion people in Snohomish County as of 2044, so 20 years out. That comes directly from Vision 2050. It implies a slightly higher amount of average population change per year than what we've experienced over the last 22 years. So if you look going forward to 2044, it's about 13,000 new people per year in Snohomish County to get us there. That compares to about 12,000 per year that we've experienced going back to 1990 through 2022. So a slight increase in the assumed average absolute population gain going forward. And how does that relate to then the Office of Financial Management's most recent projections for the county that we're to use for GMA plan purposes? They came out at the end of December 2022, and they established a low to high range, which this Vision 2050 target of 1.136 million fits within. So we're okay. The low end of OFM is at 972,000 for 2044, and the high end is 1.27. And the middle series is a little over 1 million. So we're placed in between the middle series and the high based on Vision 2050. We're proceeding with that. The other three counties in the region are as well, so that we're in sync with that regional plan and the regional transportation plan and so on. It's important that we are tied together with the other three counties and remain consistent, even though it is higher than the middle series from OFM, and it does imply a slightly higher average annual population gain per year than we've experienced in the past. Now, how this looks like for each individual set of regional geographies and jurisdictions, I want to just kind of lay out what this first graph shows. It shows the city of Everett, Metro City, for population growth from 2010 to 2020. And you can see that oops, this thing's in the way. I can't see I think it's about 700 per year. It quadrupled that Everett grew between the last two censuses from 2010 to 2020. The growth expectation in Vision 2050 for Everett would be to grow things are in the way here, by 68,000 people from 2020, which is basically quadrupling the annual amount that Everett has experienced over the last 10 years in order to reach this augmented role that Metro City is intended to play under the regional growth strategy by 2044. So a significant uptick in the growth expectations that have been assigned to Everett. What does that look like relative to their current comp plan and zone capacity under their current plan? This blue line is the buildable lands report capacity for 2035. That represents how much the city could grow to under their current zoning. And you can see the 2044 number is 30,000 higher than that capacity. So Everett has this gap or this shortfall in capacity that they will be addressing as part of their comp plan update next year. And it's a sizable one of 30,000 to close that gap and create density and capacity beyond their current plan to make that up and get them to the year 2044 growth allocation. Similarly, for employment, they've got a gap of about 25,000 jobs as of 2044 that they'll be addressing through their comp plan update process over the next 2 years. And you can also see, just like with employment population, there's a significant uptick in the average annual employment growth expectation under Vision 2050 for Everett. It's also the same pattern for the core cities, Linwood and Bothell. So they're in the same fairly similar situation where there's an uptick in population going out to 2044 relative to their last decade. And they've got a gap to address of 11,000 capacity for 11,000 residents that their comp plan update needs to address in addition to their current comp plan capacity. Same with employment. So kind of a similar pattern to Everett's situation, but the gap isn't for population and employment isn't as big. Well, let's see, employment. Yeah, gaps for population employment isn't as big. And for the high capacity transit communities, of which there's 6 cities that I've already mentioned, as well as most of the unincorporated Southwest, there's the same gap that collectively the 6 cities and the unincorporated Southwest UGA needs to make up for in their comp plan updates. In this case, it's 53,000 people because if you remember back here, the ACT community's got 50% of the county's population growth assigned to it and 30% of the county's job growth. So ACT communities play a really big role in terms of the aggregate number of 153,000 more people going to these jurisdictions. And about a third of that growth is capacity that we need to address in our comp plan updates next year. You can see that the growth trajectory, though, is more in line for these jurisdictions compared to the last decade going forward to 2044 than it was for Metro and Core. The distinction here is a lot of this growth that put the 2010 to 2020 numbers the way they are was coming from single family development in the unincorporated MUGAs around Bothell and Mill Creek in particular. And going forward, there isn't going to be the same level of options for that same type of development. Instead, the Vision 2050 plan would put more emphasis on missing middle housing and also higher density housing in proximity to the high capacity transit system. So in all likelihood, there will have to be taking a look at different housing types to accommodate this level of population projected growth compared to how we accommodated in the past. But you can see everybody in this list is doing their share. Each city, this is the shortfall numbers that they're addressing, they need to address in their comp plan update. So it's not just the unincorporated area that's got some a tall order here ahead of them, but also the cities as well in the ACT communities category. Similar situation for employment, but the gap isn't as big for employment. Less employment gets assigned to the ACT communities than population under Vision 2050. Finally, for the cities and towns that remain, not as much growth gets assigned to these jurisdictions compared to the first 3 tiers. In fact, they have a surplus of capacity remaining in 2044 overall, based on just their current comprehensive plans. Not the case for all jurisdictions. There's 3 here that do have some deficits that they'll need to address, but the cities and towns overall have a surplus. There's a slight deficit for employment capacity that all the jurisdictions will need to address in the cities and towns category in their comp plan update next year. The unincorporated UGA, however, those remaining pieces that are assigned relatively little growth in Vision 2050, the current comp plan and zoning is more than adequate to address the growth to 2044 for population that's assigned to them, and same with employment. So we have surpluses there. So that's really not where the action is that the unincorporated area is going to be taking a look at. It's in that ACT community areas along the light rail, unincorporated UGA areas of the Southwest that we'll be taking a really close look at with you for updated future land use and zoning. The rural area, conversely, we do need to look at reduced rural growth rates for both population and employment compared to the last 10 years. So reductions of half or even greater in the amount of annual population growth and employment growth, we'll be needing to take a look at that and address that in the comp plan update as we move forward with you in the next few months. So I covered a lot, but it's wanted to set the stage for how we fit in terms of the growth numbers. These are the same. I think these are the same bullets that Sarah showed you earlier. So I can jump to just any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Steve. Any questions for Steve while we have him here?
Let's see,
Any questions for Steve? Commissioner Campbell.
I always have questions. Steve, I'm always a fan of your work. I think you do a really good job, and I think it presents a challenge that you've had over the past 10 years going forward even further. And I'm interested in that Vision 2050 has shifted more into the urban unincorporated areas. And I did an op-ed trying to get the cities to take more density. You know, Bothell, I think, is maybe doing better. But what is your assessment of kind of how cities are stepping up? Because in the last buildable lands report, they didn't really meet the density requirements. And I don't know what more we can do, but pushing more into urban, unincorporated, high-capacity areas, if cities aren't doing their job. I mean, cities are the ones providing urban services. The GMA wants urban services be provided by cities. So I think there's a tension here. I don't know how to address it, but I think you're probably more closer to it than I am.
Yeah. The Vision 2050 growth allocations do not lighten up at all with regard to the city growth that's assigned, with the exception of some of the smaller cities. But if you're Everett, if you're Bothell, if you're Linwood, if you're those 6 cities from Arlington, Marysville, Mill Creek, Terrace, Edmonds, and Mukilteo, Vision 2050 says you're supposed to play a sizable role in growth accommodation. So the initial targets that were recommended by Snohomish County Memorial, which has the city elected officials at the steering committee involved in making that recommendation, the county council did include that ambitious level of growth that's called for those cities in the initial targets that county council did adopt, so that it's about almost 69% of the county's population growth to 2044 goes into cities. So it is still, it's the majority of growth. The county share in the unincorporated UGA is 28%. So when I said that Vision 2050 shifted some of the responsibility to the unincorporated UGA more so than had been in the past, it still didn't flip the role of the unincorporated UGA like over accommodating more growth in cities. It just gave the unincorporated UGA between Everett and Linwood a lot greater role because of light rail than would have been the case in the past under Vision 2040. So the cities are still looking at accommodating 69% of the growth. Now, those are the initial targets. So they got to go through their planning process with their vision statement, with the public input, with the environmental review, with the infrastructure assessment, and come back with an adopted plan next year that if there are deviations from this initial allocation, that could be challenging. If there are major deviations, it comes back to SET in 2025 for target reconciliation. So far, we haven't, in the previous 3 reconciliation efforts, we haven't been that far off. Like cities have come, pretty darn close to what the initial allocations were. So we haven't had big challenges at the reconciliation phase. The numbers are so big now that if they do come back, if somebody does come back way short, then it could, it could represent a big challenge, maybe more so than has been the case at that stage. It's too early to tell in each jurisdiction's comp plan update process where they might come out on this.
Thanks. We're looking forward to seeing them get the density.
Thanks, Commissioner Campbell. Commissioner Sheldon.
Yes, a few questions. So I'm new at this. So you're telling me what you tell me 2024 will done, and when we have to have something done, and the cities and everything else is about the same time. So we make adjustments for 2025. I just don't understand it.
Let's see. Well, each
I mean, how's your numbers know your numbers are right than theirs?
theirs being
Marysville, Bothell, Everett.
each city is required under the Growth Management Act to be consistent with the countywide policies. So those initial targets are already in the countywide policies. So they're to use those growth projections out to the year 2044 in their plan update process. Now, this countywide policies say that they have to use them for at least one of their plan alternatives. They are free to study other plan alternatives which may not get them there or may actually exceed. So they can end up at a different place. So there is a follow-up process in 2025 to make reconciled changes at the countywide level to rectify that situation, if indeed it comes about. So there's and it's not until that happens that the numbers are actually final. They're initial at this stage, setting up the planning process, and then we'll see in 2025 where everyone turned out.
Okay, this is one of those things, we just talked about 2000 down the road, 250 or 249. Basically, what you showed, we're going to be basically in trouble and down in time with what we have in population and what we have jobs for those people, right?
What I'm just as far as in trouble, you mean there is the deficit right now.
Yeah.
So gaps where they have to make up. Yeah, and that's understandable because the current plans and the current zoning are geared to a lower growth projection to the year 2035 that was used for the last plan update 10 years ago. So now we have new growth projections that add another 10 years to the plan horizon. They add more growth. So we've got to update our zoning to show how we get to that higher number. So the gap, that deficit is expected, and it is resolvable through planning. And that's what the task is ahead of every city and the unincorporated area, is to find out what the solution is to our zoning to make up that capacity deficit as it stands right now in our comp plan updates next year. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Hey, thank you.
Sure. Looks like there's another question.
You're on mute, Chair Larson.
Thanks, Commissioner Sheldon. Commissioner Pedersen, please.
Sure. I've got, thanks for the presentation, Steve. It was great. Lots of information. Something kind of rolling through my mind here is when I look at the 2044 community vision, it speaks to, all stages of life, all people who, community members who want to acquire property or rent. And the vision that I get from this is I see tall, I see small square footage, I see transit centers. And to me, that kind of speaks to rental properties. And is there any element of our plans and visions that talk about, how many condos versus how many apartment buildings? And the reason I ask is that, when you look at kind of the housing equity, there's I think an increasing missing link in terms of lots of rentals that they're expensive and people don't get the chance for to develop property equity. And is that any part of this plan, or is there any element that has concerns there, or is there something statistically that I'm missing that you can show me that it's probably not a reasonable thing to say?
Well, I think it's a relevant part of any GMA planning process. And I think with the housing element that you'll be seeing later in the coming months, there are that's a topic that will be addressed. I think there's a lot of potential for condo ownership in maybe more than is currently the case in the higher density categories. What what you'll be seeing later this year is what our specific land use and zoning alternatives that we're studying around the light rail stations would potentially produce in the way of density of housing. It may not be that all of that is necessarily rental, depending on success at changing condo liability laws at the state level. I know that's every year, that's a big push to try and make that encourage that housing ownership at a higher density every year. And certainly that's home ownership in the higher density categories is going to be really important to see how this fits in over time. But you'll see some of that information coming to you later on, what the density expectations and housing unit expectations are in specific areas. But there's also going to be coming to you more emphasis on the missing middle housing. So we'd be talking about duplexes, we'd be talking about more triplex and townhouse style development, or two-story walk-up cottage type of arrangements that would potentially allow for greater home ownership opportunities. So I think that that may be some place where the not only the regulatory environment needs to pay attention to, but also it may be where the market may start to demand more opportunities for home ownership in the type of housing that will become more available maybe than what has been the case in the past. But I think certainly those questions are really germane to tee up for the housing element discussion that will be coming to you a little bit later this year.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I'll look forward to that. And it is something, and it's maybe a traditional mindset that I have, in the thinking that these density means rentals, and it doesn't have to, obviously.
And I'll just interject that there is a lot of interest among the county council in that same question. I think they've Councilman Nearing has held 3 housing panel discussions at Planning Committee over the last couple of months that has really focused in on home ownership, trying to increase the home ownership opportunity for housing going forward. So that may be something to take note of. Their discussions and the panelists are all recorded on the county's website. If you weren't able to watch it previously, you can go back and revisit that conversation. But certainly with Chair Nearing, or with Councilman Nearing, there's been a definite emphasis on making sure that the home ownership opportunities aren't being lost in this discussion of housing need.
Terrific. Thanks, Steve.
Sure.
Thanks, Mr. Pedersen. I totally agree with that issue. If we can have people buy into the community, then they have an interest in it and they want to participate. And that's a huge thing. I've even had the idea that, I don't know if this is realistic or not, but if you think about the size of capital investment it's going to take to build the buildings, if some of those buildings were in areas that had boundaries where they became public investment areas, then maybe bonds or stocks could be available to people as an alternative form of ownership, where you own part of the growth. You invest in it. I don't know if that's real or not, but the more we can do to see participation and reward, the better, I think. Any other questions for Steve while he's here? Any other questions for Steve? Okay, Mr. Steve Toy, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Population and employment for the Comprehensive Plan 2024. This is I can see that we're at the beginning of a big process, and digesting it's going to be a challenge, but these presentations have been great. Thanks, Steve.
Great, thanks.